Now, before I introduce our main speaker, I want to share with you a little story. A few days ago, a car was parked in my neighborhood, and it had a bumper sticker that said, "I miss Detroit." I felt bad for the owner of the car, so far from home, in a strange land. So I slashed his tires, broke his window, slowly I said, "I hope this helps." If you understood that joke, you will recognize the wisdom of this comment by tonight's distinguished speaker, Dr. Victor Davis Hanson. History has shown that a government's redistribution of shrinking wealth in preference to a private sector's creation of new sources of it can prove more destructive than even the most deadly enemy. The Conservative Forum tonight is very fortunate to welcome Dr. Hanson back for a return engagement. He previously spoke to us in May of 2011, and I want to thank my predecessor as Vice President of Programs, Rita Bonacera, for persuading him to make a return visit. Dr. Hanson has a remarkable record of academic achievement. He's a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. His focus is classics and military history. Dr. Hanson has served as a fellow and visiting professor at Stanford, a visiting fellow in history at Hillsdale College, a professor of military history at the US Naval Academy, and a visiting professor of public policy at Pepperdine University. I think he's taught at more universities than I've visited. He's been awarded numerous teaching and journalism awards, including the National Humanities Medal in 2007 and the Bradley Prize in 2008. As impressive as Dr. Hanson's academic achievements are, his scholarly body of work is even more remarkable. He's the author of some 250 articles, book reviews, and newspaper editorials, as well as 23 books on topics ranging from Greek, agrarian, and military history to contemporary culture. He's a fifth-generation Californian who runs a family farm in the Central Valley and has written eloquent elegies for the decline of the small farm. Currently, he's a syndicated columnist for the Tribune Media Services and a regular columnist for National Review Online, townhall.com, and PJ Media. His column appears periodically in the San Jose Mercury News. Whatever else you may think of the Merc, if they have the good sense to carry Dr. Hanson's work, they can't be all bad. He received a BA in Classics at the University of California, Santa Cruz, was a fellow at the American School of Classical Studies in Athens, Greece, and received his PhD in Classics from Stanford University in 1980. Dr. Hanson is a powerful advocate of the conservative viewpoint. While accepting the Bradley Prize in 2008, he said, "If we are to keep what we inherited, we must condemn religious intolerance wherever we see it, pseudoscience wherever we hear it, and impossible utopian demands upon us wherever we read of them, and to do so with a newfound sense of humility and recognition of our own limitations. Of all the traits that we prize, courage and expression at this hour is the most critical." When speaking about our actions in Iraq during the early part of the 21st century, Dr. Hanson emphatically asserted, "It is never wrong to be on the side of freedom. Never." Please join me in giving a warm Conservative Forum welcome to Dr. Victor Davis Hanson.
Thank you. 2014 should be a golden moment for conservatives, Republicans, libertarians, however you self-identify yourself. We have a president who has been in office now 5 years, and we have only had 1 month where unemployment was less than 7%. This is from a party that told us in 2004 that 5.3 was a jobless recovery, as George Bush ran. We've accrued $9 trillion in additional debt. We've raised taxes. We've seen scandal after scandal, AP, NSA, Fast and Furious, Benghazi, IRS. We have a culture of division. We've never seen such class, gender, and racial division in my lifetime. And yet, it's very uncertain whether the Republicans are going to do as well as they think. And the answer is why. And I think I'd like to go through a few issues and give you some suggestions, at least as I see it. And I think the theme tonight will be, we're not appealing to the middle class. We want to appeal to the middle class, but I think we're afraid to. And we have an establishment, I think, that means well, but they're inept. When I see Harry Reid, and I see Nancy Pelosi, and I see them negotiate with John Boehner and Mitch McConnell, I think of, to quote the novelist Luis Borges, I think of two old men that are bald fighting over a comb. It doesn't work, the solutions aren't there, they don't know what the problem is. So let's just walk through some of the issues and see what the Republicans might do in this next election to prevent being demagogue. And we all know what the election's going to be like. You didn't earn that, you didn't build that business, you're a fat cat, you're a corporate jet owner, you didn't know at what time it was proper to cease profiting, now is not time to profit. You yanked out those tonsils, you took out those kidneys or whatever. We know that class warfare rhetoric is going to come, so we should be prepared for it. Let's take the first one that's in the news this week, immigration. Illegal immigration is really an illiberal issue, because whatever of our sympathies for people who were working hard and came here without proper documentation, the fact of the matter is no state can exist long if the rule of law erodes. We can't pick and choose. If you can come in and ignore federal legislation, and then you have to keep ignoring it each day you're here because you run into the gamut of federal forms, federal bureaucracy, state offices, and you always have to keep breaking the law, then it sets a precedent that any of us can break the law. I don't want to abide by the IRS. I don't want to abide by the stop sign. I don't want to abide by a mandatory assessment in my district. So it's an illegal thing to allow somebody to pick and choose which particular issues they find legal and which they find less than legal. But more importantly, think of this in class terms. Who does illegal immigration help? I'm speaking of somebody who just drove up from agribusiness. Agribusiness employs 20%, only 20, but still 20% of unlawful immigrants or illegal aliens, whatever the political correct nuance is this week. But nevertheless, the point that I'm making is that the Wall Street Journal op-ed, which represents the interest of the hospitality industry, restaurants, hotels, or landscaping, or agribusiness, is no different than the voice of Aztlan, which is the La Raza megaphone, and there's some similarities. Both of those groups are elitist. Most of the people that are the activists in La Raza are second and third generation upper middle class elites. And most of the people in the Wall Street Journal who favor open borders are elites. And who is really being hurt? Well, it's people who are in entry-level jobs. The vast majority of them in our state are Mexican Americans. It's the people who, from Korea, Nigeria, and Slovakia, tried to get into the United States. And they're still waiting to get into the United States because they made the mistake of not flying to Mexico City and crossing the border illegally. How liberal is that? And who are the people, by and large, that do not have the money to afford gardeners and nannies and personal attendants and cooks? It's the middle class. Today, Bob Shrum, who managed 8 losing presidential elections for the Democrats, said the Republicans are practicing a form of apartheid. This is from somebody who lives in an enclave of Cape Cod. What is my point about that? You have to show compassion, you have to show humility on this issue, but the Republicans have to start saying, I accuse you. I accuse you of selling out the interest of poor and entry-level workers. The Department of Labor has proven the last 20 years the single greatest pressure that put wages static or forced them down in the American Southwest was the presence of 11 to 15 million undocumented workers who were welcomed in by wealthy people for cheap labor and for wealthy identity politics people, all with the blessing of the Democratic Party, who saw constituents that could be represented collectively rather than individually. How liberal is that? And yet we can't make that argument. Instead, we're going to hear apartheid, racist, nativist, and we're going to cede that battlefield. And so if we're going to reclaim the Republican Party and the conservative movement, we have to tell our elites in Washington, I'm sorry, I know that you need labor, but you're not going to need cheap labor and sacrifice this issue for us. It's a matter of principle and law. It's a matter of justice and fairness for the middle class. It's our main constituency of the conservative movement, and it's fair also to foreign nationals who want to come to the United States. Believe me, if we just simply said, if somebody is here in the United States and has committed a crime and been convicted of it, we don't think they should be here. If they have just arrived in the last 3 years with the scent of amnesty in the air, we don't think they should be here. If they're on public assistance, we don't think they should be here. We want to make legal immigration racially and ethnically blind, not based on proximity to a border. We want to make sure that everybody of every different color, every class, every race can come based on what they can do for the United States. Do they have a bachelor's degree? Do they have skills? Do they have capital? If we were, in other words, take this issue and make it entirely meritocratic, who would be objecting and who would be biased and who would be nativist? It would be the Democratic Party. They would be exposed for what they are. There are people who are trying to get a constituency from South and Latin America and Mexico so that they can be represented collectively rather than individually. It's a shame that we are trying to outbid for the Latino community in a way that I think most members in the Latino community will eventually resent. Look at energy. The President said the other night, under my leadership, we have produced record levels of natural gas and petroleum. And then we had a response from the Republican establishment. Did anybody in the Republican establishment say, shame on you? That came despite, not because of you. You did your best to stop every new federal lease for gas and oil on public lands that you could. And it was only because private, audacious, and courageous people in the private sector tried to do horizontal drilling and fracking that revolutionized this industry, kept us from going bankrupt despite your best efforts, improved our situation abroad and especially in the Middle East, and you opposed it, and now you have the audacity on national TV to take credit for something that you tried to destroy. Anybody say that? I don't know, but who was the beneficiaries when we let people frack and horizontally drill in a responsible way? It's the middle class that has to commute and pay money at the pump. I wish that the people who adjudicate the prices at Southern California, Edison, PG, and E command, and I want to remind you that we have the second largest hydroelectric, 10% of our needs. We think, the largest natural gas reserves now in any state. We still produce about 400,000 barrels of oil, even though the area that we can produce it has shrunk. Even with that, we have the most expensive power bills in the nation. Some of you are going to say, well, so what? We have the highest sales tax, the highest income tax, and we have the highest gas tax, big deal. But we do have the highest power bills. And I wish the people who make those mandates, many of them my colleagues in Palo Alto, for good reasons about wind and solar, would just come down to Selma or Sanger or Fowler about August 10th. It's not 75 like it is on the Stanford campus, it's 109. And families, poor families, middle class families go to Walmart. They don't go to Walmart to buy things, they go to Walmart to sit because they can't afford the air conditioning bill. Because under our set of rates, a middle class family could easily pay $700, $800 a month to keep their house at 80 degrees during that period, 6 to 8 weeks. But yet nobody's concerned about it. Energy is a middle class issue, and it's a winning issue for the Republicans if they can make the populist appeal. If they talk about Texas oil men need an oil to appreciate, they're going to lose the issue. Obamacare. We know that the Republican establishment has been quite good pointing out the inconsistencies and the lies about it. It did not create 4 million jobs. It's going to lose 4 million. It did not save anybody $2,500 per year. It's going to jack up premium. It's going to jack up deductibles. What it is, though, from the point of view of populism, is it's the greatest tax on a age cohort in the history of the Republic. We are basically telling people that are young, who are parents, 26 to 30, we do not want you to use this health care very much, and we know you won't use it very much. We know you don't have very much money, but we want you to pay more than you would have before Obamacare. I speak as a parent who's had children who bought their own plan. We want you to pay higher premium, we want you to have a higher deductible, and we don't want you to use it, and we know you're broke, and we have all these debt, so we can transfer that capital to a cohort who will use it more and has more money than you do. And we want to subsidize their costs. So we're essentially telling the poorest cohort in terms of age in the United States that we're going to tax you. That's what the Chief Justice called it. And remember, this is also an appealing issue to young people. For all the hope and change and for all yes we can and vero possumus, you can put it in Latin, the youth are being absolutely destroyed by this administration. You look at unemployment, you look at Obamacare, but I want to really focus on another issue. Obama talks about student loans, and we have to have more student loans. If you look at the student loan rate, almost consistently they're higher than the mortgage rates. So we're asking young people to pay 7 and 8% on some of these loans when their parents are paying 4 and 5% on mortgages. Some of the loans even kick in, as I can attest, as a parent, before the person's even graduated. $1 trillion has been imposed. And by whom? By a university and college system that for the last 25 years has upped tuition higher than the rate of inflation. How many speeches does a professor have to give about exploitation at Walmart with the greeters and the clerks so that in the class next door, somebody who teaches the same class who's a part-timer without benefits makes 25% for doing exactly the same amount of work? My point, the university and the academic world is the most exploitive and exempt institution among us. They have increased administrators on the CSU campus in the last 30 years by 212%. How many assistant provosts for diversity do we need to jack up tuition on working class people who have to borrow money from the government and then we say goodbye? Youthful unemployment's 15%. So the university says, come to us, we're going to make you very, very progressive people. Borrow $1 trillion, the government will guarantee it. We can jack up our tuition for our administrative bloat, for the sociology of this and the ethnic studies of that. Every class that has a dash in the studies quorum, these students are going to pay for it. And we need to appeal for them and say, you've been had. You've been mesmerized, you've been hypnotized by people who were con artists, who wanted your borrowed money that you're going to be paying off for the next 30 years, and they didn't even have the decency to train you how to think inductively or write good prose or give you a good chance at a job. And that's what we've done. That's a populist issue for conservatives.
Well said.
We did another thing. I'm 60 years old. This is a stereotype. This is really a lousy generation that I belong to. Because not only do we do this to students and with Obamacare, but we have borrowed $9 trillion. We own 17, soon to be $18 trillion. The only reason that we can pay this debt each year is that we are paying 1/3 of the interest rate that Bill Clinton. Our interest on the debt is the same as when Bill Clinton was president, and it was 1/3 the size. But that doesn't mean that interest rate is always going to be near zero. As soon as the interest rate would go back to what it was in 1994, we would nearly quadruple the amount to serve as $17 trillion. That's coming. But more importantly is we said that we have to have certain entitlements. We have to have a farm bill. We have to have subsidies for beekeepers. We have to have more people on disability. And we don't want to pay for it because that would be cruel to the children. And so we're going to borrow this money and we're going to make a generation that's coming up pay for it. How liberal is that? Can't we be spokesmen for our own children? I mean, how many children do you have to have in the basement at 30 looking for a job that doesn't exist with the idea that they're going to be embedded within the system that's going to require far more taxes from them and far less services? That's a populist issue. So is interest. You know, this is something that at the Hoover Institution we're not supposed to talk about if we're not economists. But this is very illiberal what's happening with the Federal Reserve. Because we're basically saying something like the following. People like yourself in the audience. Play by the rules, put $200 or $300 in the bank each month, and then you're going to retire at 65, and say you played by all the rules, you weren't profligate, you saved money, and suddenly you have $100,000 or $200,000. What's it worth? Nothing. You're going to get no interest on it. The interest you get, the 1%, is going to be less than inflation. You would have been much better off being a state employee, because a state employee's actual rate of return represents $2 or $3 million saved up. And so what are you going to do? Are you going to rush into the stock market? Do you have that expertise? Some of you do, but most people don't. That's an aristocratic pursuit under Obama. The stock market is doing great. And the people below who don't have money to put in stocks and haven't saved are going, every time I drive in the Fresno, I hear about 3 commercials. Credit card problems, call this number for debt relief. Mortgage problem, call this number for mortgage relief. Tax problems, call this number for tax relief, etc. Tuition problems, call this number to welch on your debt. But it's not the middle class that are doing it. So essentially, the country has said to them, put your cash in passbooks because you don't know much about the stock market, where the money really is, apparently, and you don't qualify for any debt relief, and we're going to take it from you to run up this big debt for other people, but we're not going to pay you any interest. And the result is keep working till you're 70, and then we're going to say you're greedy because you're not making room for younger people to have a job. What is so liberal about it? Can a conservative say, you know, we don't want 19% interest, but how about paying 3 or 4% on passbook accounts so people who are retired could have some income, the middle class, in the private sector, no less? It's an issue that I think would be a winning one for Republicans. We talk a lot about diversity. You hear about diversity all the time. Jerry Seinfeld talked about it the other day when he was criticized. And we're told that John McCain didn't look like America. So I thought diversity was an encompassing idea, that you could be diverse in religion, you could be diverse in ideas and thought and politics. It doesn't mean that. It's a superficial, illiberal idea. It's the diversity of the tribe, which is what America was supposed to supersede. People came to America because they were of a particular ethnic creed that was discriminated against for that reason in Europe and South America. We didn't want to have something like the Balkans or Rwanda. So we come here and suddenly we're told you have to have diversity. We say, well, we do have diversity within a meritocratic system. We want to punish people who are illiberally discriminating on the basis. But that's not what they mean. So we're dealing with that, but what we're not dealing with is the people who are insisting that there should be superficial diversity are using that issue to be exempt from the ramifications of their own ideology. I mentioned Bob Shifron living in Cape Cod talking about nativists who are skeptical of comprehensive immigration. Do you really believe that the people who run Google or Apple, our kids, are in the Redwood City School District? You think Mark Zuckerberg, who's now accusing all of his enemies who are skeptical of open borders, he said they were nativists, or at least his publications have said that. Do you think that the Zuckerberg family is going to put their children in a city school district that's impacted by illegal immigration? No. You think Al Gore really believes all of that he says about us? This is a man, remember, the multimillionaire, sort of like Crassus in ancient Rome. You remember he would burn down a house and show up with a fire truck? He said there was this impending doom, global warming. Oh yes, I'm here to offer you a video. He was no different than Tony Robbins, with the exception that he'd been in politics. Not nearly as he was sort of a green Elmer Gantry. What did he do? When it came up time, he had a failed cable news station. And nobody would buy it, except one person would buy it. A Middle East medieval monarchy who wanted to have an outlet for Al Jazeera to spout its anti-Semitic hatred. Remember, this is a news organization that interviewed the architects of IEDs that blew up Americans in Iraq. So Al Gore not only did that, but he had a trifecta. He not only, the liberal not only sold to an illiberal regime, but he had made a career, $1 billion plus career, in damning carbon and fossil fuels. And he sold it to whom? Somebody whose profits were petrodollars by hawking petroleum and natural gas. And then he said, I can top that. I'm for higher taxes, but I understand that the taxes that I support are going to go up in January. So can't we push to this sale so I can avoid capital gains on this lucrative $100 million deal? Did we say anything? No. It's almost as if we're going to hear when Hillary run that Bill Clinton is the great feminist of our time. Or John Edwards is the great feminist of our time. Or John Kerry is part of the working class. So, Rand Paul is the only Paul, and I'm not saying that I endorse him, but I did admire him the other day when he said something about at least he didn't want to suffer through Bill Clinton being a feminist this next season. My point is that the Republican establishment has to realize what liberalism is. This is not the party of Harry Truman. We're not talking about an 8-hour workday or overtime or disability insurance. We're talking about an alliance from very, very wealthy people who feel terrible that they're so wealthy, but not enough to stop being even more wealthy. And poor people who they feel have the charm and the romance that the middle class lacks. So the very, very wealthy people feel so bad that it's like medieval penance. Remember how the medieval world worked, say, in Florence or Rome. When you wanted to worry about the fact that you were not going to the kingdom of heaven because of your money lending or your sexual proclivities or whatever it was a classical sin, you went to the church and you bought 6 blocks of granite for the dome of St. Peter and said, can you please put that on the ledger to give me an exemption? And that's what modern liberalism is. The very wealthy, whether in Silicon Valley or in Washington, D.C., they say to us, George Soros, John Kerry, they're all about us. I feel so bad. I still want to live in Atherton. I still want to live in Malibu. But what can I do that costs little and has nothing to do with my family and preserves my apartheid? Oh, yes. I'm going to champion open borders. I'm going to champion diversity, as long as I'm exempt from it. And I really like the poor, as long as they're distant. There's not an SCIU in the Malibu Gardeners. There isn't. There's not a unionizing movement. Acorn is not breaking down the doors of Apple and Google and Yahoo. It's just not happening. When Barack Obama raised money, it was written up in the New Yorker magazine by David Rimmick, he was not going around to meetings like this for donations. He got in the presidential jet and he just went down the West Coast from Seattle to San Diego, and he went to the houses of the mega rich. And he gave impassioned pleas about unfairness, why they gave him bundled millions of dollars in campaign contributions. And that's how sort of it works. And the people he does not like are the middle class, because they do really grubby, uncool things. They buy jet skis. They save for a Winnebago. They have a camper on their truck. Their kid goes to San Francisco State rather than Stanford. They can't be helped. They can't say, you know what, I gave money and you're in a diversity scholarship or you're in affirmative action. I feel so good about myself that you're there. They don't see anything good about it. You don't have the romance to appeal to them in the abstract. And that's something that needs to be made. We haven't made that. Some of you were thinking, well, he's getting desperate because he's trying to turn every issue into a populist one for the conservatives, but I plead guilty, and I'll end on one: gun control. Every time there's a shooting, we hear that Sarah Palin mentioned a target. or we have a gun culture. And I live in a very sort of violent area, rural Fresno County. And I'm 60 years old. I have never been threatened. I've never had an encounter with anybody who had a legal weapon. I have had problems with people who had illegal weapons. I just got back from Pepperdine, where I'm teaching one day, and I have a bad habit of driving the Pacific Coast Highway sometimes when I want to think, from Malibu up to Santa Monica and back. And I look at these $40 million estates. If I pull over on the Pacific Coast Highway to get a cell phone and follow the law and not answer it, I notice that there are security details everywhere. I mean, they're not like the ones at 7-Eleven in my hometown. They're tasteful. They have Volvo SUVs. They look like they have suits, but they're carrying, I can tell, they're packing. In other words, guns are good for the very wealthy who outsource their security and have the capital to do it, just like they outsource capital. And they're okay for people apparently in Chicago or Detroit who are killing themselves and have access to weapons, even though they have the tightest gun control laws in the world. But once again, guns are not good for people who follow the law, register them, use them for hunting, and want to protect their family in an increasingly unsafe society. That is a populist issue. And yet every time this issue comes up, the Republicans look like deer in the headlights, and they are cast in the media as somebody who wants to ensure that everybody has a 500 clip gun, or it's a machine gun, or it's an automatic weapon, assault weapon, whatever we call it. But it's never really put in the idea that the wealthy have access and they outsource their security to guns, very lethal guns, and the poor who commit crimes ignore it, and the middle class is neither, but is the Second Amendment epitome of a law-abiding citizen. Where does this all lead? I think what we're going to hear in 2014 and 2016 is what I always call the sober and judicious argument. Just when you think that you can be a little bit middle class and a little bit populist, somebody from the establishment said, oh no, you've got to be sober and judicious. And I like John McCain. I think he would have been a much better president than Barack Obama. But when we nominated him, I heard that he was more sober and judicious than anybody. He may have been. But the problem was that as soon as John McCain was nominated, he was no longer the maverick of 2000 that the media adored. All of a sudden, he was a man who couldn't even remember how many houses he had. And then we heard that he married a woman who was an heiress to a beer fortune. Not the Kerry fortune, it was kind of a beer fortune. It didn't have the class of the Heinz ketchup marriage complications. And he said he was out of touch. And that class warfare went on, and he ran respectably in a sober, judicious manner, and he lost. And then we nominated Mitt Romney, and I thought Mitt Romney would have been a wonderful president. I wouldn't be here tonight if he was president. You wouldn't be here either. The country would be on the road to fiscal solvency. Whatever you say about Mitt Romney is an honest man. He would not have sicked the IRS after his liberal opponents. There wouldn't be a Fast and Furious. There wouldn't have been a Benghazi, and if there had been a Benghazi, he would have been candid about it. So let's make no mistake about it. He was a wonderful person. He just was a lousy candidate. He was a lousy candidate partly because he didn't have the skills, but partly because the people around him did not understand what he was going to be portrayed at. When they nominated him, I have a farmer right next door who's a conservative Democrat. And he said, when they get done with that guy, he's going to have a little Lloyd Fauntleroy suit on and 6 elevators in his house. And then all of a sudden I turn on the thing a week later and I hear he has an elevator in his house. And he didn't talk to the garbage man. The garbage man was on a commercial and said, you know, I can pick up his garbage. He never came out and had coffee with me. Is that the Obamas do that all the time. And then I heard something even worse. I heard that his wife had multiple sclerosis and that she was an equestrian. She was guilty of being an equestrian. In other words, she didn't have a horn on her saddle. And I heard that horses cost $700 or $800 a month and nobody can afford it and only 1% have horses. By the time they got done with Mitt Romney, he was unrecognizable. Now, some of you were going to say, well, that's not Mitt Romney's fault. That's what they do. Exactly. You can't ask them to do anything else. That's what they are. They believe in class warfare. but not because they're Truman Democrats anymore. They want to improve the status of the working class. They're not worried about somebody who's from Oaxaca and Fresno who can't afford power. They're not afraid about the farm workers that I drove past today on Manning Avenue. You should do. I suggest you all go down I-5 and drive out Manning to the 99, and you will see something that you have never seen in your life. We have let 20 million acre-feet of water go to the Pacific Ocean in the last 5 years. Now, let me remind you that our largest reservoir, the new Malones Dam, is only 2.5 million. San Luis is about 1.75 million. It's about 15 San Luises on Pacheco Pass that we have emptied because people who were very elite and very worried about their souls going to the right place, which is some kind of nirvana, liberal nirvana, they have decided they have so much money and they have so much privilege that they want to do something good as penance. And they latched on to a 3-inch bait fish in the Delta. Now you could argue that the 3-inch Delta smelt had some problems. We're not sure whether the populations in long term are going up or down. But it was just as likely that the 20 municipal sewage districts in the Bay Area, sewage coming from very liberal people, might have increased the nitrogen content enough to hurt the smelt. I don't know if that's true, but it's under discussion. It wasn't a done deal. You didn't need to divert 20 million acre feet to flush out high nitrogen as a remedy for a problem that somebody else may have caused. But more importantly, we weren't done with that. Our ancestors had told us, where I grew up, that there were salmon in the San Joaquin River. So it would be 105 degrees and salmon would be jumping on their way to their ancestral spawning grounds. It was a little bit dubious. There are some occasional anecdotes, but you see, Henry Huntington and these great entrepreneurs went out and built these beautiful lakes all in the Sierra Nevada. Huntington Lake, Edison Lake, Florence Lake, Shaver Lake, Pine, all these lakes, and they stored mountain runoff. Whereas before, the rivers would dry up in July and August, the Cahuilla, Kern, the Fresno, the Kings, the San Joaquin. Now they didn't, because the environmentalists had an unenvironmental, most unnaturally created helper called a man-made reservoir that now they said is not that unnatural, because that will allow us to have better salmon runs than we had in the 19th century when the rivers dried up. So we'll be quite unnatural in making a natural habitat, and I'll feel so good because I'll know that there's a salmon jumping in Fresno. The only problem is I'll have to divert another 5 million acre feet out of Millerton Lake. So today when I drove, the water is flowing out of this pathetic reservoir that's got about 1/8 capacity. It's on its way Fresno, out to Fireball, out to the Delta. So some fish and game scientist or Berkeley professor can continue this idea, whereas if you go on Manning Avenue, you can see the direct causation and result. There's a big sign as these older almond orchards are being pulled out. I don't mean 10 acres, 40, 60, 80, 300. Thank you, Delta Smelt. Thank you, Representative Pelosi. Thank you, Dianne Feinstein. Thank you, Barbara Boxer. And the land, we're going to put out 250,000 acres out of production immediately, and perhaps another 500,000. Who's going to be hurt? Farm workers, town people that live in Mendota, Tranquility, San Joaquin, 5 Points, Huron. These are not people who toil 12 hours a day under the beating sun. They're skilled people. They have skills. They're tractor drivers, they're land rippers, they're pesticide applicators, they're equipment operators, they're sophisticated irrigators. They're not going to have a job because the Delta smelt and the salmon runs 5 years ago. And what's the remedy now? There is no remedy. People say, well, we have to divert this one. There is no water to divert. It's gone because of the pipe dreams of an elite class that did not care and has never been to Tranquility and will never go to Huron and will never set foot in Mendota and couldn't tell you the difference between Dinuba and Sanger, and yet all of those decisions that they made to make them feel so good about the world affected people that they don't really care much about. These are not poor illegal aliens. These are people, the Latino middle class, who are trying to make a living for their family. And so I wish we would think about that this year, because when we nominate somebody, if they do not go on the attack, and more importantly, if they do not enjoy going on the attack, this is fun for me, fun for you to live, I hope, because we have to expose what liberalism has become. It's not a serious political movement anymore. It's almost a psychological disorder. We're very, very influential, powerful people. To latch on to particular unproven political theories and dreams that make them feel so much better about their extraordinary wealth and privilege and apartheidness. And the people who suffer from it are the constituencies of the new Republican Party. It's a new Republican Party, and they're middle-class people who worry about energy prices, they worry about crime, they want to have people have access to arms if they want, they want to have cheap energy, they're worried about the impact of illegal immigration on the law, on their schools, on poor people trying to find jobs who are citizens. They're worried about interest and debt. They define diversity in the most classically liberal sense of meritocracy of everybody and diversity of ideas and characters. And yet we're not being represented by our establishment. And so think about that in 2004. And the next time somebody in this Republican establishment says, wait, we've got to get somebody sober and judicious, unlike hell. Thank you very much.
A brief Q&A session. There are a couple of ushers walking around with index cards. If you have a question for the speaker, for Dr. Hanson, please raise your hand and let the ushers know that you'd like to write something down on the index cards. A couple of reminders. If you'd like to have a conversation during this time, rather than listening to the Q&As, if you can take that conversation outside past the double doors so that the people who want to hear the Q&A can do so. And then also a reminder to our speaker, we have a very active and engaged audience, as you may remember from your previous visit. We're going to have a lot of questions. In my memory, I don't recall us ever running out of questions. And so if I could ask you to try to keep your answers brief so we get to as many of them as we can, I'd appreciate it. Okay, so let's give one more thank you to Dr. Hanson, and then we'll do that.
Oh, here you go.
Please try to keep the answers rather crisp and short. We got a lot of questions. Other than educating ourselves, what can I personally do to restore the Republic?
Pacify.
Well, I think you need to speak out. What's happening in the country, speak out to your friends, speak out, call into your radio station, vote, but speak out. I think what's happening, I'll try to be very short as promised, is that the 30% that is fundamentally, quote, famous quote, fundamentally transforming America is loud. But there's a seething rage of about 55%. People are angry. You encounter it all the time, but they're going to get only angrier and more shrill unless they speak out now. So you have to express you have to say that's stupid or that's wrong. And you have to do so with elan, audacity. You know, it's like reminds me of Danton once said, the famous French enlightenment something. I don't know if you call him a revolutionary author, but Patton, it was his motto. It translates l'audace, toujours l'audace, encore l'audace. Audacity, more audacity, always audacity. You can't ever worry about your social position or that you're a conservative Republican that just doesn't do that. You have to welcome criticism and you have to welcome derision. Wear it as a badge of honor.
How can we prevent 12 million undocumented Democrats from getting amnesty?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
How can we prevent 12 million undocumented Democrats from getting amnesty?
Well, I think I tried to spell it out. You have to appeal. 40% of the state is Latino, who are residents and green card holders and citizens, and the ones that I know, and I don't know very many people else other than Latinos in my hometown, are not necessarily for illegal immigration because they're taxpayers. I just talked to a Latino yesterday and he said, I went to the, Victor, have you been to the waiting room lately? Local doctor. And I said, yeah, I know. He said, nobody speaks English, nobody has insurance, everybody has not taken care of themselves, they just walk in as foreign national. I said, what do I do? But so there's a natural anger of everybody, because I have great admiration for people who come from Oaxaca and work very hard, but the problem is we can't take everybody from Oaxaca. We can't take people who break the law. And once you break the law and you continue to break the law, it becomes habitual. And it has an unlawful effect on the wider social fabric. So what do? I suggest that we immediately close the border, take a deep breath, and said, Mr. Obama, we do not trust you because you pick and choose which elements of your own health care law that you choose to enforce, so that we know any deal you do on a comprehensive immigration will not be enforced in the areas that you disapprove of. So here's what we'll do. 6 months, enforce the law and finish the barrier, close, and then we'll have an outside commission adjudicate if it's working. Then we'll go back and we will deport people who broke the law and were arrested and convicted, and people who never worked and have been on some public assistance, and people just arrived, and then we will have a pool that we can discuss.
Very good.
That's what we should do.
On the issue of university tuition and leadership, what's your view of the recent appointment of Jenna Napolitano, head of the UC system?
You know, I don't get into I wrote a column not long ago about the CSU system, and I got so much. I don't think the personalities matter much. I knew the prior UC chancellor a little bit. I know some of the CSU presidents a little bit. But I just think the problem with academia today is to get into a position that you would be appointed a UC chancellor or president of a campus is, by definition, I hate to say it because it sounds illiberal, but suspect. Because you've had to make so many compromises throughout your career, especially at the CSU. The CSU system is the largest university system in the world, 22 campuses. When I began, there was 30% remediation. It's 55% remediation. That means 55 out of every 100 students that enroll in CSU, you name the campus, cannot read and write at a college level. And yet to bring that up is considered illiberal. So why aren't the CSU administration saying we have a national state crisis? Or why doesn't the public school system say we're ranked 47th in our 8th grade test in math and science? And we don't talk about that. We don't make any association. We don't worry. All we say is we need more money for the children. And I don't think we do in the CSU or UC system.
And we have to have
Some experts have predicted a global financial meltdown in 2014. What is your opinion of those predictions? I'm understanding that you're not a certified economist.
Well, I think civilizations, as a historian speaking, they always go out with a whimper rather than a bang. So I don't think we're going to blow up, but it's going to be increasingly a little bit more like the situation in Rome or classical Athens. Slowly, the debt increases. The problem we have with democracies, I'm a big supporter of democracies, as are you, is that ultimately they get into an end stage where the people keep voting themselves entitlements without, and there's always they can pay for it, and the they shrinks and becomes non-existent. That's what happened in 4th century Athens, it happened in 5th century Rome, it happened in 15th century Byzantium, it happened in England, Great Britain after World War II. So we're going down that trajectory, and unless you have some effective, charismatic, and skilled leader with character to warn the people, you know, you're insolvent. But the voices of the masses are always louder. It's for the children. Or how dare you do that? Or my cousin was on disability. So it's very pessimistic, that trajectory. But it's slow. We have a lot of rot that we can enjoy as we go down the tube.
We have a lot of what?
Do you see anyone on the horizon who will lead the conservative Republicans to victory?
You know, I don't want to endorse any candidate, but I see elements that I wish I could glue them together like we always do. I like the fact that Ted Cruz is uncompromising, and he's very learned. I didn't like Rand Paul, but I'm beginning to like his wit and kind of cynicism. And he looks at things in a different way. I wish I could glue those two things together. I like an element of Sarah Palin where she just comes on and gushes and just doesn't care what people think. Put all of that together and you could come up with a candidate. But whether we'll have one like that, I don't know. We'll have to see.
Maybe we could have a triune president.
To what extent do you think that the Tea Party can influence the GOP?
Well, let's be honest, if there had not been a Tea Party, the Republicans probably would not have won the House. Had they not won the House, the debt would be much bigger. We wouldn't have had any audit of any of the president's programs. There would be no opposition to speak of. So the Tea Party is, you know, it's sort of like, to quote Lord of the Rings, it's sort of like Gondor, the last bastion. It's holding off Mordor. So I have great respect for them. I must confess that one thing, though, is that when I speak or I go to universities or I meet establishment figures, it doesn't take more than 2 seconds. I always hope for it, but it takes 2 or 3 seconds where some grandee says, you know, the Tea Party. And then I always try to think of who would be the most outrageous person to name drop would be Sarah Palin. They despise her. And although she's a problematic candidate, I really think the Tea Party gets under the skin of the Republican establishment and the media even more than the Democrats. And that's good.
Your rational arguments appeal to the attendee, but I find people often vote based on irrational feelings, in particular fear of Republicans as the religious nuts, or people who will take away the right to abortions, even when they would agree with your other arguments. How do you reach them?
Well, I would say that given the tradition of the Founding Fathers and the central place of religion in American life, there's only one extreme religion. Let's be honest. It's a radical, secular liberalism of people who have lost their gods, or they've substituted some hyper notion of logic, and you can't appeal to them. So if you say that the Earth hasn't warmed up in 17 years and global warming science is conflicted, they don't believe in science. If you try to explain that affirmative action is now problematic because we have 3rd and 4th generation people who are 1/3 this and 1/8 this, and the guy from the Punjab is darker from the guy from, and we don't know how to figure it out anymore, they get angry. So you can present logic to this new religion called liberalism, but it doesn't appeal to them. It's a very dangerous religion because it's faith-based. It's not empirical. And people get very angry when their faith is questioned. As somebody who has a lot of liberals in my family, believe me, it can be very dangerous.
Can you confirm that today Obama signed a farm bill that is going to tax Christmas trees for $15?
Well, he taxed tanning booths, so it's possible. So anything is possible with Obama, because Obama essentially, as I said, he scans the political horizon, and he sees the very, very wealthy. He likes the very wealthy. The people make more than $2 or $3 million a year. They're romantic. They go to Harvard. They have taste. They have good handbags. They go to Costa del Sol, Martha's Vineyard. He feels like they wear the right attire in the golf course. But there are other people who are trying to get there. 200, 188. I don't know what it is. He has nothing but contempt for it. So they're the people that he targets the most for taxes. The poor, he doesn't want to be with, but he finds them romantic. So, yes, he'll tax anything he can. I would think it'd be a little bit higher, though, $25 or something.
What lessons from military history can our conservative candidates apply with their respective campaigns?
That's a very good question, because the Republican Party is exhausted after Iraq and Afghanistan. There's libertarians, there's isolationists, there's still a few neoconservatives, there's interventionists. All I would argue is that in a time of debt, in a time of skepticism about the efficacy of American power, we have to ask ourselves where we got where we were. After World War II, we looked back and said, you know, after World War I, we didn't participate. We saved the British and French. They bore the great cost, but our 2 million men in World War I saved that cause. And it was the 70th anniversary of World War I. It was worth it. German militarism would have made a different world as we know it. And then we withdrew, and we know what happened. And then after World War II, we said we're never going to do that again. So we formed a post-war order. Barack Obama, in a very brilliant way, I think it's brilliant, cynically brilliant, but nevertheless brilliant. He's looked at the mood of the American people and said, these guys are exhausted. They do not want any more Afghanistan for good reason. They don't want any more Iraq. But their reasons are different than mine. I really doubt whether the United States should or could, but more importantly, intervene. But more importantly, I don't think they have a moral right because of their own checkered past. There's nothing. They're the 1%, just like the 1% at home didn't really build their business. America's the 1% that really didn't build their national stature abroad. And I want to check it. So what he's been doing, whether it was the apology tour or lead from behind or the dropping of the sanctions with Iran or the pink lines with Syria or the false deadlines with Iran or the sort of distancing from Europe, he's created a period of turmoil, and that post-war order, now we're going to learn what it really was, because we're not going to have it. And what's the world is going to look like by the time this man leaves office is, I'll give you 3 or 4 quick examples. China is trying to be like Japan in the 1930s. It's flexing its muscles. It wants to transform economic power into military influence, and it's telling Japan and South Korea and Taiwan and the Philippines, maybe even Australia, the United States isn't there. They're not going to risk San Francisco for your cities. They don't want him. They're trying to downsize nuclear weapons. They don't take their word seriously. Look what they did in Syria. They don't want to be engaged. You're not under their nuclear umbrella. You're facing North Korea, South Korea. You'll be on your own. Japan, we have some disputed rocks with you. Don't try to press us. And they're either going to force these countries to become nuclear, to restore deterrence, or to make concessions. And we look at Europe, the same thing. Europeans are baffled. They always thought that they were Athens and we were Rome. They were the philosophers, we were the muscle. Now there's no muscle there. And they can't be philosophers if there's no muscle. And that bothers them terribly. And Iran, I think the sanctions had almost broken the back of their bargaining position. Now it's wide open. It'll become nuclear. When it becomes nuclear, I think the Saudis will buy nuclear weapons from Pakistan on the sly. I can see that nobody likes the Greeks. They're poor, they're bankrupt, but we have a neo-Ottoman power in Turkey that's overflying their airspace. So what's happening is when we withdraw, the post-war world unwinds, and all of these regional hegemons, Russia and Eastern Europe and the former Soviet, China and the China Sea, Turkey and the Eastern Mediterranean, Iran and the Middle East, they're going to assert authority. And I think it'll be a much more dangerous, much more illiberal world as we withdraw.
Is one of the main causes of the high cost of higher education the retirement plans for the professors and administrators?
I didn't hear that last one.
Retirement plans of the administrators and professors.
Yes. Well, you know, not for attestation, we're among friends, but I taught 21 years at the CSU system, and then I had this strange apparition one day in 2004. I walked across the campus. I went into my office where I'd been 21 years, and there was a sign, "No blood for oil," by somebody who owned a Land Rover. And then, an hour later, I tutored, most of my students were Mexican Americans, many illegal aliens, and I always would tutor them in grammar to make them competitive. Greek grammar, Latin grammar, German, anything. And the person across me in the English department was telling a young Hispanic student, "You don't need to know any grammar, it's a construct of wealthy people." So this was the new English, impressionistic grammar. So a couple more incidents happened and I quit. I snapped. So I walked over to the PERS office and I said, "I quit." I said, you can't quit. I said, just did. Give me the thing. So I quit. So I got a call from an administrator and said, you can't quit. I said, I just quit. And, you know, I talked to the Hoover about 3 years earlier. I called and said, well, I have a job. I just quit. And this is what I'm getting at. The PERS conciliate, the PERS advisor called me up and said, do you realize what you've done? Your retirement's going to be about $18,000. I said, that's more than I ever made farming in 1 year. I'm happy. That's too much. She said, well, here's how we spike it. We can get you a 12-month contract. You'll stay 2 more years. We can get you a pay raise, so we can use that as your top 2 years. We can cash in your sick leave. We can take a formula, and for a very little amount of money, you can buy years of credit. When we're all done, we can get you 60 if you'll just stay 2. The point is, I'm not making fun of people who do that. I'm just saying that most of the public, as I said earlier, who has $100,000 and getting $1,000 a year, and it's less than 1,000, it's minus 1,000 with inflation, they don't have access to that. And so I'm really worried about the public employees. We have about $19 trillion of unfunded liabilities in California, and it's unsustainable. And then when you have the administrative class, here's 2 things to remember because they're very germane about our new populist stance that we want to take. And it involves the CSU system, again, which I know the most about. As administrators increased 212%, this is the very liberal people. They're all very liberal. They're very caring. They're very progressive. They went up 212. Part-time teachers who have no benefits, no seniority, no job security, they got up to 48% of all the units are taught by part-time teachers. So basically the UCSU system said to support this pyramid, the little cone on, the little triangle on top, we're going to exploit all these people. I mean exploit because they're doing the same job for the same pay. It's not very liberal.
Some fear the U.S. Constitution will be used to defeat its own foundation using the freedom of the religion of Islam, which seeks to replace our culture and government with Sharia law. Please comment.
I don't know about that, but I am worried that the president is looking at the amendments, especially the Bill of Rights, and he's picking and choosing which are going to be literal and which should evolve. So the President of the United States says, well, and his supporters say, well, the Second Amendment should be collapsed because, you see, our ancestors had flintlocks. They never envisioned a semi-automatic round, and therefore we have to collapse it. And then they take the First Amendment. Remember, there was no internet, there was no computers, there was pamphleteering. And they say we have to expand this to include pornography and all types of expression on the... It's just the most... And that's what they do with all the amendments. Those that they find a progressive tint to, they expand beyond the original intent. And those they find illiberal that reflect what they feel are reactionary views of the founders, and they want to be absolutely literal as if we're back in 1789 and we all have flintlocks. So it's hypocritical. We need to point that out more and more.
Do you trust election results from the electronic voting machines?
I don't.
I guess like everybody else before Obama, I did.
A blue finger.
You'll like this one. Will you run for president?
I couldn't get elected dog catcher of Salmon. I mean that literally. So I don't think so.
Do you think we can impeach Obama, perhaps by joining forces with such radical groups as LaRouche PAC?
I didn't hear that.
I'll repeat it slowly.
No, I don't think Obama's an iconic candidate. You have to be very careful about talking about what. By that I mean is that he's exempt from empirical analysis. By any Nixonian standard, he's far more corrupt. By any Carter standard of foreign policy, he's more inept. By doing things that as far as being inarticulate, he's far more inarticulate and less knowledgeable than George Bush, who was caricature. But he's never going to go below 40%. Never, because Mitt Romney was right. For a large segment of the population, he represents get even. Because my own plight is not where I want to be, and it's not my own fault. It's cosmic forces of them that did it. And this man is going to champion my cause, and he brings out all of my frustrations and angers at them. And so it's very hard to do something like that when you have a permanent constituency of 40%. If Obama tomorrow apologized again throughout Europe and went all through the Middle East apologizing, if we were just to learn tomorrow that the number on disability has not only doubled but quadrupled, it wouldn't make any difference. He could have 7 IRS scandals. He's not going to go below 39 or 41%.
The Keystone Pipeline should have been built and finished years ago. Obama obviously hates poor people because the price of gas would be $2 a gallon less. Maybe it would help the poor people. How can we vocalize this issue?
Well, I think that question framed it really well. The argument for Keystone Pipeline is that a bunch of very wealthy people in the environmental movement and in the liberal wing of the Democratic Party don't know how to weld. They don't depend on welding. They don't know how to rivet. And so as far as they're concerned, if you ask them what a pipeline is, they couldn't describe it. They don't care. It's something, and they don't really commute as some people do from Mendota all the way to Harris Farms or something. They don't have to drive 80 miles. They're not in Wyoming or Montana. So and it's sort of like, high-speed rail. All these people thought high-speed rail was so wonderful, but the catch was you're going to try it down in Fresno, and you're going to have to build a line from Fresno to Corcoran to see Charles Manson that nobody goes on. Nobody goes there. There's already an Amtrak line. It goes from where? Fresno to Corcoran. There's a 99 freeway that goes in that general direction. It's a complete mess. When the state was 18 million people, it had 2 lanes. When the state's 40 million people, it has 2 lanes, and people are killed and maimed on it every week. But this mindset says, I don't really care about that. I don't really care if there's an existing Amtrak. All I know is I like the idea of high-speed rail. It fits my green profile. It makes me feel good about myself. I just don't want it in the Bay Area. Not to start off with. We'll go down with those yokels and we'll tear up some stuff in eminent domain and rip out, 1,500 acres of beautiful farmland. You should see where the proposed route is. And then they can deal with it, and if it works, we'll consider it for us. It's the same old saying.
Does it make any impact at all when we contact our liberal legislators, or do they place our concerns in the round file?
I had this experience in a small way that when you do contact them or write, they do listen. They don't like it, but they are aware of what you're saying. If I have written things critical of Barack Obama, and my syndicator, Tribune Media Service, comes out of where? Chicago. I have been given a phone call saying, we love your call. We'd love to keep it. We like the fact that we're getting a lot of papers, but can't we expand our topic a little bit? Can't we look at other things if you want to keep the column? Or I've had high legislators call up with a string of profanities. You blank, 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 blank. That's really good. I think the one that got people the angriest was I had heard Barbara Boxer talk about diversity. And then I said, how odd is this? We're in California, diversity, 40% Latino, 12% Asian, 9% African American, very diverse state, and yet the 3 most powerful women, Barbara Boxer, Nancy Pelosi, and Dianne Feinstein, are, if I could use the term, mature women who are very wealthy and whose husbands are hyper-capitalists, and they're all living within commuting distance of each other. Not very diverse. I really heard from some of their staff. But it's true. It's diversity for thee, but not for me.
Would you comment on the NATO gun control issue? We understand the senators voted for it.
Is that the NATO? about that issue to confess, but I will say that there's a whole array of issues in foreign organizations and the United Nations that progressives in the United States want to apply to the Second Amendment on the idea that we're aberrant and exceptional. And that when they say that, well, I just got back from Florence, I just came back from New York, we had coffee in Munich, and believe me, nobody has a gun law like you guys do, us, and they feel really bad about that. So they're always trying to enlist a intercontinental organization to remedy the Second Amendment. But that makes most of you feel, when you hear that from some person who just gets back from Europe and said, oh my gosh, I was in a cafe in Venice and everybody was talking about how weird the United States was, and that makes me feel great. Yeah.
Another good one. Is there some way to give a presentation by you to the Republicans in one or more of their gatherings? Please comment.
Well, I'll be very brief. I'll tell you I did that a couple of times, but I'll never do it again because they wanted me to give a presentation a few years ago on immigration to the Republican House. So I went in and I was introduced as a classicist who was going to talk about immigration. Of course, Nancy Pelosi, being in California, she had her operatives in the room. And a young Latino guy got up and he started shouting at me. He said, why are you listening to them? He's confessed that he's a classicist and he believes in class warfare. I said, case made.
In Obama's State of the Union address, he mentioned a new MyRA, my retirement account. There is talk this would be used to replace China's ending of buying our debt. There has been talk of the government taking control of our existing retirement accounts. How do we stop this?
You know, the thing about Obama, the age of Obama, is that what used to be surreal is now matter of fact. It's very scary. And I know that in 2007 and 8, I would turn on the radio and there would be this barrage of talk about Barack Obama from Hannity and Rush, Levin, and we all sort of said, well, that's fun to hear, but it's a little bit over the top. Now you hear those people and they seem like Nostradamus. I think that's not, I think when people look at the size of the debt and they look at the amount of capital that's in 401ks, and they look at countries like Argentina that's doing that right now, that's expropriated, it wouldn't be very hard if you were Obama. If I were Obama, I would say, well, you know, I don't know, but the 1% they had a little extra, they had a little push, you know, they didn't build that, they got that capital, and it's just sitting there, and there's people, the children are hungry, and there's people going without jobs, and if this can help us collectively and help everybody, and it would be a good thing. And of course, they won't mind, and I think it's possible.
You may have answered this earlier. What do you think we should do about the illegal immigrants currently in this country?
Well, I just explained that I know a number of them that are very hardworking. They came here under the auspices that there was an open border. In some way there was in the 1990s or early 2000s. They've never been arrested. They've never been on public support. They didn't come for amnesty alone. They came to work. They broke the law. If we were to weed out those other three groups, the opportunists who wanted amnesty and came, the criminals who have been arrested of a crime, and that would include, by the way, DUI, and then the people who are on public assistance, you'd still have a sizable number. And I think you could work with them and say, we have to find a system where if you really want to stay, you can get a green card, pay a fine, and then if you want citizenship, the green card would be renewable based on the criteria I just outlined, and then if you want to be a citizen, after people who in your year cohort who came or applied legally, then you would go behind them, and it might be a long process. And we think, well, 1986 Simpson and Mazzoli, only a third took advantage of it. I think a lot would take advantage of it because of the Democratic Party. But we want to make this a long process, I think, and examine people very carefully. And each person that we let in, the problem that I see with illegal immigration, the majority are coming without legality, without English, and without a high school diploma, which is okay. Give us your tired masses and all that from Miss Lazarus. But we have people in this high-tech, interconnected world who do want to come here, and they do either have capital or skills or education, and we're discriminating against them. And remember this is very illiberal because it's a form of racism. And I tell you why I know that. I debated a book I wrote, Mexifornia, with a Mexican consul. And he was going on and on about our moral obligation to Mexico, not Mexico's moral obligation to us to explain why it's driving its poor indigenous people out. They're not Spanish grandees from Mexico City, after all, that are coming. And I said to him, imagine a freighter lands at Point Reyes every day and 3,000 Chinese nationals or Korean nationals or Nigerians come out and they get off, and there's so many of them that finally we have in California 4 million illegal aliens that came by barge and they just landed and they were poor and they needed help. Would you object to that? Well, yes, I would object. Well, why would he object? It's the same thing, except it isn't the same thing, because as he said to make this, the audience was appalled. It was very left. It was in San Francisco. And he said, well, we have historical ties. I mean, and so there is a sense that the Mexican government thinks they have a historical claim. They did a Pew poll, international poll. Think of this, 2001. They asked 1,000 Mexican nationals in Mexico. Question 1, do you think the southwestern United States belongs to Mexico? Yes. Question 2, by 54%. Question 2, would you like to leave Mexico and enter the United States? Yes, 56%. Now how does it make any sense? It's like saying, we don't like what Mexico did to us, so we want to leave, but we want to make where we want to go into Mexico. It doesn't make any sense. So it's an illiberal tribal impulse. And remember, I know I'm getting a little obsessive, but where did the word La Raza come from?
Race.
As a Latin professor, I know it comes from radix, race, and they will say, no, it means pueblo, but it wasn't used in the popular culture until one person in 1936 popularized it. His name was Francisco Franco in Spain, and he said, I'm going to create a new La Raza movement. And you know what he did? Because he looked over at Germany and what Hitler was doing, he said, they've got a word in that vocabulary that we need to match. It's called Volk. Volk does not mean you speak German, or you live in Germany, or you're a German citizen. Volk meant in the 1936, you look a certain way. You're of a certain race. And Franco was saying, we Iberians are more than residents of Portugal and Spain. We're more than Spanish speakers. We are a essence. And he came up with Raza. And so did Mussolini, and he just added a Z. And so this is so ironic that this liberal organization has coined a 1930s fascist idea to identify people, not by their language, not by their country of origin, but by their race. And I think it's one of the most undiscussed, unexamined elements of this entire immigration debate, this question of what race. If you take race out of the equation and you say we want immigration to be ethnically blind and we want it to be meritocratic, the people who would be the angriest are the La Razas. Just a fact. It's not the majority of Mexican American citizens, it's not the majority of Latinos, but until people call them and say, when are you going to forfeit that nomenclature? Every other group would be crucified if they used a term meaning the race. And don't believe their excuses that linguistically or etymologically it doesn't mean race, it does. And Franco is their forefather, not Thomas Jefferson.
Last question. Do you have any comments regarding Article 5 of the Constitution that provides for a constitutional convention initiated by the states? This is something that
well, what I'm worried about
Mark Levin is talking about.
Yeah, if you would open that up, historically when constitutions are opened up, it's not the Mensheviks that win, it's the Bolsheviks. It's not the French reformists, It's Robespierre and the Thermidors that take over. It's not the sober opponents of Batista, it's the Castroites. They're the most organized. So what I'm worried about in this country is that if you take the 55 or 60% of people who are really worried about the direction of the country, and they're not nearly as organized or not nearly as vocal as the 20% that controls academia, the foundations, the media, the government, journalism, and they find themselves in your daily television, your movie fare, your newspapers, your media, the foundations, grants. They're far more influential. And I think that what would start out as a populist discussion would end up pretty bleak. Thank you very much.